Hi, folks. Shall we start the meeting now?
Yes, that sounds like a capital idea.
Okay. I think we have Dan here in the meeting. Daniel?
Yes, I'm here. Should I claim the host and
Sure. Yeah.
talk about federated Istio and walk through the demonstration?
Yeah, that's the first one. We can start with that.
Okay. Looks like I need a host key to claim host role.
You can start with sharing the screen or the app.
Yeah, let me try that meeting. All right, how do I do that here? Interesting.
There's a button named as share. You can just click this button and
yeah, I just get the Zoom window and I don't see anything with sharing. Meeting, enter full screen, show participants, show chat, start share. Let me just share my desktop. Let's see. Is that font too small for everyone, or should I make it bigger? Is that okay?
I can see it.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Danian Hansen. I'm a principal engineer with Cisco. And for the last few months, I've been working in the Federation V2 community with a focus on trying to solve a specific use case. And that is, how do you manage Istio across multiple Kubernetes clusters? Where each cluster contains its own Istio control plane. And when I was going and doing my research, I came across Federation V2. And as I started to dive into the project, it just, to me, made more and more sense to really explore meeting this use case using Federation V2. And so why? If you look at Istio, it's simply a collection of Kubernetes resources, just like any other application that we would run in Kubernetes. And Istio is very similar to Kubernetes. It is getting to a point where it's beyond just, okay, how do I run and manage a single Istio service mesh to, okay, how do I go ahead and have meshes across all of my clusters. And it's more, it's more than just the control plane, right? Being able to get Istio up and running. Istio has a suite of capabilities for traffic routing, security, telemetry, and really what's behind the scenes of those capabilities is a lot of custom resources, similar to how Federation V2 extends the Kubernetes API using CRDs, Istio does the same. And you create these custom types like a destination rule or a gateway or a virtual service to basically utilize the functionality of the Istio control plane. And so from a use case standpoint, we not only want to be able to manage Istio control plane across all of these different clusters, but unify the capabilities of Istio so that I can create a federated route rule and know that if I say that service A cannot talk to service B, and I want every instance of that particular service pair in each of my clusters to follow that same rule, I could create a federated destination rule, and know that that rule is going to have that consistency across each of my Istio service meshes. And I say herd Istio like cattle is, no surprise. We don't want to have to treat Istio like a pet. I want to, use the same established management lifecycle patterns that I use for any of my other applications. I want to use for Istio, and so I don't want to have a whole separate set of tools, workflows that I need to use in order to manage Istio. And let me pause here for 1 second, just so I can go ahead and kick off the demonstration, because it may take a few minutes as well. So I created a simple demo script, and what this demo script does is essentially walks through federated Istio. And just a quick note on what you're seeing here is so I've created a repository called Fed v2 manifest, and within there I've got the federated Istio manifest, the documentation, these demo scripts, probably a few other things as well. And I'm in the process, and I have opened an issue on Istio.io. So if you go to the Istio.io, Istio documentation site, if you're unfamiliar with it, let me escape out of here. And basically this site right here, you'll see that here for docs, right, there's setup and tasks and so forth. And there is a section somewhere here that maybe it's under examples. Yeah, enabling multi-clusters. And there's a few different options here. And my hope is that we can gain enough mindshare to have this type of documentation exist here. Federated Istio or using Federation v2 to manage multiple clusters. Let me go back here. Minimize this. And let me just make sure the demo is chunking along. Okay, so, and I'll go back and talk through the demo here, but let's just finish the conversation first. All right, move out of my way. There it is. So what about existing solutions? So not only was I exploring Federation v2 to address this use case, but I really started within the Istio community and saying, okay, well, what's out there? And what I came across was a lot of solutions. And again, you go back to the Istio documentation site and see this for yourself, is a lot of the solutions that I have found, most of the solutions that I found was extending the Istio mesh. And so what I didn't like is that it still consisted of a single control plane. And the users that I talked to as I vet out this use case is that a single control plane just will not work for production use cases. And so with those solutions, I immediately kind of put a cross next to them and said, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. Another thing I see with the solutions is there's this emphasis on being able to have, service A and mesh A of cluster A talk to service B and mesh B of cluster B, this kind of cross mesh cluster communication of services. And again, I kind of go back to my use case, and what I'm getting is that that's not as a common of use or a requirement, that there's more interest in having kind of the standard cookie cutter approach to say, okay, this is how I manage Kubernetes. I have a Kubernetes instance, across, let's say it's 40, 50 of them, 50 Kubernetes clusters across the world. And each of my applications that I deploy or intend to deploy are kind of contain within that cluster, and many of them expose some kind of front end using an ingress or Kubernetes service, that there wasn't really much of a need to say, I want a service in one cluster to be able to communicate with a service in another cluster. Not to say that that doesn't exist at all, but it's just not as common as the need or the desire to say, I want a very simple cookie cutter type of approach for my cluster, the applications that run on the cluster, any type of services that run in the cluster, and services, one of those services being like a mesh service like Istio. And I don't really see a consensus for solving the problem. I'll share this this presentation with the community, and that's actually a link to a presentation that has several other links to all the different documents, like design docs, as well as some preliminary repos for tools. One of the tools is a kind of a configuration sync across Istio meshes. But one of the things, or what I see, is that the community, Istio community, is trying to come to a consensus. And I say, should there be? Because, I think there's different use cases out there, and I don't know if there's necessarily one approach that meets all of those use cases. And so I'm trying with this approach of federated Istio is to stay true to this use case that I've described. And one of the reasons is I think it's a fairly common use case, and so there may be 4 or 5 different ways that people want to manage Istio meshes across their different clusters, manage their applications running across their Kubernetes clusters. But I think this one that I'm focused in on is one of the most common. And if so, I think it could be good for the Federation V2 community, Istio, as well as the consumers of these technologies. I say, where's the beef? Is that, if you spend some time and look at some of the solutions out there, you'll see that there's no real strong community behind any one of the solutions. You'll see that there's not really much uptake, really no users that are starting to gather around. And again, kind of coming back to Federation V2 is one of the things that interested me was the strong community that's behind Federation V2. I've been doing the open source stuff for about 8 years now, and I know how important community is. You could have a great idea and throw out a repo, but if you don't have the diverse development community behind a particular project, it's hard to sustain it. And so what's so special about Federation, about federated Istio? And I'll jump right down to 4 since I just mentioned it, and just to reiterate, I really appreciate all the help, from the community, even being able to get to this point. I couldn't do it by myself, that's for sure. And so I really appreciate everyone's help. And I think that's just a testament to, to the possibility of federated Istio, is that, there's a lot of really good folks here in the community that not only helped get me to this point, but I think can help take the solution even further. But let's go up to number 1, the consistency, right? Again, if I'm thinking scale, I don't want any one-offs. And so I don't want a one-off for Istio to be able to manage Istio and to manage any of my Istio-enabled apps, right? I want to be able to create federated rules, federated virtual services, federated gateways, any of those custom Istio types, and know that every instance of that particular service across my clusters running on an Istio mesh have the same rules, are exposing the same front end in the same fashion, whether it's cluster 1 or if it's cluster 100. Number 2, I think, is really important as well. As some of these other projects that I've seen, you're having to trying to wrap your mind around more tools, different types that you're unfamiliar with, and how are these types constructed? And what I do like about Fed V2 is that if you understand what a config map is, it's very simple abstractions with templates, placements, overrides, very easy to understand. And then any of the types that are federated, it's like, oh, I know what a config map is. Well, a federated config map is the equivalent, right? And so to me, it's really important to have a very easy way to ramp up as a user or even a developer for Federation v2 and federated Istio. And so from an Istio standpoint, again, using the Istio custom types, whether it's a virtual gateway or a gateway, I know that the federated virtual gateway is its equivalent. And I know that it pretty much looks and feels the same way, the federated counterpart, as it does a standard Istio custom type. And I think that, again, is really important to kind of break down the barriers of getting ramped up on federating Istio or any other application within that you want to federate. And I say number 3, the best of both worlds. Not only do I get that uniformity, but we also know that there are times that you need to have differentiation to make, to have one-offs here or there. And I think you get the best of both worlds with Federation v2. Is not only do you get the uniformity, but with overrides, for a particular cluster. Let's say one of my clusters in this example that I've been providing is a development cluster, and I want to use different secrets or different service accounts, whatever it might be, or different configurations in my config map. I have that flexibility with overrides. And one of the use cases that I would like to solve next is upgrades. And I think doing live upgrades, I've started to test it, and then ran into just challenges, and the challenges aren't with Federation v2 or federating. I mean, this is a challenge just within trying to do this on a single mesh. And what it is as Istio releases, you just get a whole new giant manifest that includes all of the Istio types to install Istio from scratch. So there are no documented ways. There's no release manifest that say this takes you from 101 to 103 or 008 to 100. And so I want to be able to address that, because again, I started down that path, and what I'm consider doing live upgrades for Istio meshes, I think could be a huge differentiator for federated Istio. I'd say what's next is socializing federated Istio. It starts with today. I'm already scheduled next week to present to the Istio environments group. I'm working with the Istio networking group to present as well. I've been talking to Sriram, who's one of the key members of Istio networking. And so, yeah, continue to socialize it. And it sounds like I'm going to also help present this content at KubeCon, or probably won't be exactly this content, but something along these lines. Prioritize and fix open issues. I think Maru's probably seen me open up 20 different issues, and some of them I need to go back and either close or just expand upon. And there are some issues that have been addressed as I've been going through this process. And again, I really appreciate all the help from the folks that have been help get us to this point. And continue to explore use cases. I touched on kind of that continuance, and that is, how could we do live upgrades? And trying to find that kind of that lighthouse type of user that we can use or work with to really kick the tires on federated Istio and make sure that that we're not so focused on this initial use case, or I'm not focused on this initial use case, but how the use case expands, morphs, evolves, and so forth. And then just also looking for suggestions. Anyone in the community that has time that can go and install and run and test and just play around with federated Istio. Would love to get your feedback. All right, demo. Let's go back to the demo really quick and see where we're at here. Let me just kind of scroll back to where I kicked it off, and I'll just talk through this really quick. And go from there. All right, so I do have this simple run demo script. First thing that we do is we federate the additional Kubernetes resources needed, things like cluster role binding, custom resource definition. You're probably familiar that Fed v2 has these core types like secrets and deployments and so forth. And for anything that's not core, you have to go ahead and federate those using the kubefed2 federate command. And that's essentially what's happening here. There is this issue that I opened up, issue number 354, where I need to go ahead and update these two service accounts, or basically a service account per cluster. So let me pause for a second and just talk about where I'm at here. So before I ran this demo, I essentially just followed the Federation v2 user guide, set up a couple Kubernetes clusters. These clusters are actually running on GKE. And then I did the deploy federation script and deployed the federation for those two clusters. And just like the user guide, the host cluster that's hosting the Federation v2 API control plane is in cluster 1, and then cluster 2 is one of my target clusters. And with this issue 354 is for both of for each target cluster, every cluster that essentially Federation v2 manages, there is a service account that is created that's used so that the Fed v2 API can actually go out and create the target resources in those clusters as needed. And what I found with issue 354 is that there was a permission that the target account or target service account did not have. And so, so I have to go ahead and basically update those two. And this issue, if you see it, it's already been discussed, and it's just a matter of implementing. Istio wants to have its own namespace, so we create the namespace, and then we install federated Istio. And installing federated Istio is a single manifest that consists of a ton of different Kubernetes resources, custom resources, and so what I did is I took the standard Istio manifest and just converted all those resources into the federated equivalent. It was pretty painstaking, and I think an issue that I created was being able to have a tool. I think it would go a long way for the Federation v2 community to have a tool where I could just ingest a standard manifest and spit out the federated equivalent. I think that would go a long way. And so you see basically all of these federated resources that are created needed to instantiate the Istio control plane, config maps, service accounts, cluster roles, custom resource definitions. I mean, look at all of these custom resource definitions that are created by Istio, and these are all the federated equivalents of those custom resources. And then the last piece of the installation is a federated horizontal pod autoscalers. And one thing that I had to do in a standard Istio installation manifest, instead of just stopping at the horizontal pod autoscalers, the installation then continues to proceed with creating the Istio custom types, like a gateway, a virtual service, and so on and so forth, route rules or what have you. And I had to basically cut the installation off there, because what we need to do, and what you see here, is going back and federating those specific custom types. So again, using the kubefed2 federate command, and federating the gateway, the virtual service, all that good stuff. And you can see here, right? So all these custom Istio types that need to be federated. And essentially what that kubefed2 federate command does on the back end is it creates a federated type config. It creates a CRD. And Maru did a really awesome job. I appreciate you creating that functionality. One other thing that I had to work around, which I think this is just a temporary workaround from the feedback that I got from Maru, is as part of the installation is Istio creates these mutating webhook configurations. And the initial mutating webhook configuration has, I think it's a CA client cert that's empty. And as one of the control plane components called pilot installs, it creates a service account, grabs the TLS assets, and I think it's the CA cert that it takes, and then updates, patches the associated mutating webhook configuration with that TLS material. And what I found was kind of throwing me for a loop is that I initially federated the mutating webhook configuration, and I just wouldn't see it updated. And then finally it dawned on me, I was like, well, you know, the way that Federation v2 works is if you create a federated resource, and you try to go ahead and change the target resource associated with that federated resource, it'll just revert it right back, right? As a sync controller says, wait, you know, this propagated version's changed, the constants are different, let me go ahead and revert it back. And so I said, oh, wait a second, let me not federate it. And then it worked. But from talking to Maru, it sounds like maybe instead of, I just need to change the template to, instead of looking at, I think it's a version, we're going to look at generation instead and see if that solves the issue. And if so, then I'll close out issue 389. And then, you know, I'm just checking the pods to make sure everything's running here. I see that, you know, the Istio control plane consists of several different components. And for cluster 1 and cluster 2, they're all up and running. I'm checking that the mutating webhook called the Istio sidecar injector is there. I label the default namespace, and I'm labeling it with injection, Istio injection enabled. That tells a sidecar injector to go ahead and inject the envoy or the Istio proxy sidecar for every pod that gets instantiated. And then to really test Istio to make sure that it's working, you have to deploy some kind of application. And so the standard sample application is book info. There's others in the community, but this is the most common and most well documented. So I go ahead and create the book info application. You can see that it consists of several different services. There's a product page front end that we'll see here in a minute. And then there's reviews and rating service and all this good stuff that make up the application. You see that the pods are running and not all of them. So I'll check again here really quick to make sure that all the pods for the sample application are running. And then Istio used to just use the Kubernetes ingress to expose services outside of the cluster. But then that changed, oh gosh, about 4 or 5 months ago. And there's these Istio custom types called the gateway and a virtual service that are used to now expose services outside of the mesh and cluster. But let's just, and so really quickly, we federate the virtual service that's needed for the book info gateway, just like what we've done throughout this demonstration. And then we create the book info gateway, right? And doing that, we essentially expose the front end outside of the mesh and cluster. You see that they exist there. And then the last piece is actually test, right? And so Because it's GKE, GKE gives me load balancer IPs. This is for the cluster 1 Istio book info gateway, and this is for cluster 2. But before I test that, which it tested and it looks like it succeeded here, I want to just make sure that these pods are up and running. Okay, so that is for cluster 1. Change the context to cluster 2. Good. And let me just curl these myself just to make sure that they're good. All right, I get a 200 OK from cluster 1's book info gateway. And for cluster 2. And what we can do, if you'd like to, let me go ahead here and is there a chat window? Where's a chat window? More participants. Where's a chat window? How about I just put it in the Slack channel? Multi-cluster. I'll just throw them here in case you'd like to test this yourself. And let me actually, so you can see what it looks like. Let me close out the presentation. Oh, come on, Zoom, get out of here. Oh, hello. There's one. How do I dismiss? How do I close this? Get out of here. No. Okay. All right, so that is the product page front end for, I think it's cluster 2. And here's the product page front end. Oop, I keep forgetting to remove the curl. The next thing I'm going to do, so at this point, walk you through using Federation to get Istio control plane up and running, deploy a sample application that's been federated, right, across the 2 clusters that make up my federation. And what you'll see here with a sample app, again, this is kind of the common demo you see. Every time I refresh, for the most part, you'll see different ratings, or this is part of the reviews service, excuse me. There's a reviews V1, V2, and V3. And very simply, V1 has no stars, V2 has black stars, I believe, and V3 has red stars, right? And again, we can do this with both, right? So got 2 instances of this gateway. But as I mentioned in early talk, is federated Istio is not just about, okay, we got things running, we can have this uniformity for multiple instances of Istio control plane and the applications that run on Istio, but actually using the Istio features, right? And I'm going to demonstrate just one very simple feature, route rules, to say, you know what, I want to only, I want to basically have all traffic go to V1 of the reviews service. And so, within non-federated world, again, you just create the route rule type, and then I could actually show you what it looks like here. Sample info routing. Let's see, route rule all V1. Right. And so basically what we're saying here, and again, this, if I'm very new to federation, this all looks very familiar to me because I would create a virtual service, and my virtual service would look just like the federated equivalent minus the spec template, right? You know, the other thing that's new with the federated equivalent of the virtual service is there's, you know, there's the virtual service placement that goes with, you know, the federated virtual service placement that goes with the federated virtual service, telling you know, federation, where do I want this virtual service to be created? I want them in both of my clusters, and you can kind of go through this yourself and see that you know, it's a bunch of virtual services and destination rules, and essentially we're just saying, hey, any of these services that are communicating that make up this application, send it all to V1 of the reviews service. Right? And I'm creating these federated rules and federated Istio custom types the same way that I would, you know, create them if they weren't federated using kubectl create. Again, kind of going back to that user workflow and user experience, this is all very familiar to me. I'm not having to, you know, have my mind explode trying to figure out new ways of doing things and new types that I have to deal with just to be able to federate Istio and work with any of the federated functionality that Istio provides. And so we go ahead and create the resources needed to make sure that now our application is only using V1 of reviews. And now we should just see, and go ahead, I gave everyone the URL here too. Feel free to test it yourself. We're no longer seeing V2 or V3, right? There was one more thing that I wanted to demonstrate that I had working, but recently the multi-cluster DNS API changed and so forth. And so one of the things I wanted to do next that I actually had working up until the recent changes was that, okay, this is awesome. Let's say I have 3 or 4, 5 or more instances of this book info application that I'm using to simulate a real application. But I don't want to expose, right, 5 of the, you know, being able to use the multi-cluster DNS capabilities. I can go ahead and basically front end all of these instances, you know, with a vanity URL, and we'll just call it what I'm using, you know, productpage.danian.com, and everyone just see all my users see a single front end, and what I was doing to test was, okay, well, let me take one of them down, let me try upgrading one of the applications. All that stuff was working, and it was basically hitless. And so that's kind of the one piece that I want to get working again, to just kind of finalize the demonstration. And then again, as I talked about in the presentation, is I think the next big kind of sub feature under federated Istio is the federated Istio live upgrades. If we can show, okay, not only can you do a live upgrade of your application like book info, okay, you know, if I'm a user, okay, that's very interesting. But if I could go ahead and say we could basically shift, you know, all your traffic, all your users to, you know, one data center, one that's running Istio, and your book info app and Istio is running, upgrade cluster 2, you know, Istio control plane in cluster 2, you know, test it really quickly, then shift that traffic back, and have everything work, and then shift all the traffic to the new version of Istio and the new version of the application, upgrade cluster 1, and then get it back to normal where it's shared between both of those, I think is really powerful. But I will, I'll end it there with asking if there's any questions. Is everyone still out there? Did I lose you? Oh, good.
Yeah, Dan, I think there's quite a lot of things there. I think it's a very good thing. As you rightly said, I think there are so many use cases in multi-cluster scenarios. And this is one way of doing it. And I think, yeah, I think many people are realizing it now. So I think there cannot be one solution fitting all. I think that's what we are doing in Federation V2, like building primitives. So I think if we can demonstrate more user scenarios like this, I think then we could take this project to a success. So that's all we are working for. That's a good work. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. One last thing I did want to mention on a personal note is, so I'm part of the cloud CTO organization within Cisco. And basically our whole organization is being eliminated. So so I'm in the process of trying to find something else within Cisco and outside of Cisco. And I'm hoping that I could find something that still allows me to work on Federation V2 and or at least cloud native. So do me a favor, keep me in mind if you do see any opportunities. You could always direct message me. I'd appreciate it. And thanks everyone for your time.
Awesome demo. Really appreciate your persistence in pursuing this, because it certainly hasn't been easy. And I would say you're one of the most educated users of Federation at this point. I mean, obviously you're participating in more than just that, but it's really nice to see the community growing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have one question for this, because currently we are just using some YAML templates to deploy the whole Istio application. So here I'm just wondering, is it possible for Federation V2 to support the Federation Helm chart so that we can deploy the Istio chart or some other charts with this? So we will not need to update so many templates, but just create a federated chart, and then it will be deployed across different clusters.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I was, this is probably about a month ago, I was going to file an issue in the Helm community. And as I was getting ready to file the issue, I'm like, wait a second, come on, do a quick search, see if there's something out there. I'm like, oh, well, there is. And so there's an issue out there for Helm to support Federation, but it was an issue that was open probably about a year ago. And as I read through it, it looked like it was really geared towards Fed V1. And so I just kind of added to the issue to say, hey, Federation V2 is really, starting to gain traction. Or would you consider Fed V2? Never heard anything. And it looks like the issue is just kind of gone stale anyways. So I would really like to see the capability within Helm where you go and you say Helm template create, and and it just creates the federated the federated equivalent of a standard manifest that Helm would generate.
Yeah,
that would definitely be doable. I mean, before now, we haven't really been looking at generating stuff dynamically, but as soon as we get into being able to convert an existing resource, then any resource that Helm is going to be able to apply, we can just convert it before application to the federated equivalent. Yeah, I think it's doable in a reasonable amount of time.
And just to mention, there is a plugin support for Helm. I think we could develop such a thing in our work group, independent of that help development.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, I think it's important to have both. And maybe over time that changes. And to Maru's point is that from my experience, I don't think it's going to be a whole lot of work. I mean, if you look at it, it's pretty consistent. It's, hey, for every standard resource that we see, create the federated equivalent, create the placement for that federated resource. And we know that if you look at a federated config map compared to a standard config map, we're talking about changing a few fields, so, but I think from an adoption standpoint, because even outside of federation, I've heard from users just from an Istio standpoint, having to convert things like standard ingresses to Istio gateways and virtual services is painful. And so any tools that we can give people that say, hey, all you have to do is just give us your standard manifest that you use, like istio.yaml to deploy a Istio control plane, give it to us and boom, we spit out the federated equivalent for you is very attractive, because I know having to do it manually is painful, time consuming, tedious work, and really error prone. I mean, I probably would have saved myself hours and hours just from the error prone standpoint, let alone having to manually convert this stuff over. And it'll help us with the whole life cycle, right? I mean, people after a period of time, work that they don't want to do, like having to do this tedious work of converting over these manifests, it ends up sitting in the back burner. People don't want to do it, and so having that tool is going to make the ongoing management of being able to support the next version of Istio, right? I know for me personally, it's like, okay, the next version of Istio comes out. If I had some kind of tool that I could just, simply convert over that whole list, I mean, take a look at the manifest and you'll see really quickly how long it will manually take to do that. If I had a tool, then, now it's not taking me very much time at all to continue to support the next versions of Istio that are released.
Yeah, this is John here. I totally agree with Dan on this. We recently started testing federation in our bare metal cloud, and it was, it sometimes feels like it would be nice to have that tool even to a vice versa. For example, a customer does not want federation and they want to go back to like using their own configs, and if we can reverse it, or from a federation back to an isolated namespace, or vice versa, or somehow be able to cut off the link from federation, taking away the management of the particular namespace was one thing we were wondering if that's something we can work on. But I totally hear having such a tool to actually at least convert the standard configs and YAML specs to a federated one is kind of going to be much helpful for the customer, at least, because then you don't need an expertise and like real human labor in making that conversion for each one of them, right? So I totally hear that.
Yeah, and to me, that would be priority number one for like the next step of development. Because you think about it is what I did is I federated the Istio installation manifest, which you look at that and your mind wants to explode. And that's just the Istio installation manifest that's generated from the Helm template generator. Forget what the exact Helm command is. But if you look at an Istio release, and I'm happy to kind of CD into the directory and show you all this stuff, there's a few different demo manifests for TLS, no TLS. And then there's just tons of directories of different examples, right? I gave the example of just doing the virtual gateway service route rule, federating that, but there's a ton of different examples and samples and sample applications. Like, I mean, if we could have this tool, it wouldn't be all that difficult to go ahead and say, all right, well, let's create a script that goes in and just converts all of those resources. And those resources are maintained by the community and released every Istio release. To be able to go ahead and say, okay, well, we have this, this kubefed2 generate, whatever we want to, call the command. And then it wouldn't be that difficult for us to say, okay, let's just have a script that goes in, pulls the Istio release, and then goes ahead and just generates all the federated equivalent of those assets that are released per Istio release.
Yep. By the way, I also had something as a feedback while I was going through the documentation, not on specifically on the federated Istio, but the larger Federation V2, is that I think having, I don't know if this is even a thing, but the documentation assumes that one of the cluster is both a host of workloads as well as the control plane, in terms of like being able to negotiate and create federated resources on that cluster. But what we were trying to do was keep a separate control plane that would just do the work of federation, and the other clusters do just the, that basically take commands and create the actual concrete resources. It is kind of, the documentation doesn't mention that use case, but it would be nice because then, that way the federation control plane sits in one cluster, and it's kind of in that, I don't know, just a feedback. Right now, all the examples assume cluster 2 and cluster 1, and we were trying to say, hey, can we separate out one cluster to just do federation work and keep the rest of the clusters like any other cluster?
I mean, that's a perfectly valid use case.
Okay.
The primary reason it's not pointed out explicitly is that clusters aren't necessarily cheap.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
you're going to
Yeah,
go
that's
through the
not
trouble
easy to
of
try.
managing a cluster, you might as well run workloads beyond federation on it. But by no means were we trying to preclude that deployment strategy.
Okay, so it is still a thing that we can go after, right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I think maybe it's just a note that you make in the user guide, because to Maru's point is like, yeah, I mean,
okay,
when you're consuming and working with this stuff, I mean, you want to try and limit your resources as much as possible, and their clusters aren't cheap. But I think just having a note in the user guide that says, hey, in this example, cluster 1 is not only your host cluster, but also a target cluster, and explain the reasons why a user may want to have a cluster dedicated just as a Federation V2 control plane and not be the target cluster as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
I think Paul was.
Yeah, I think Paul is not there. I think the next item we have was releasing the OO3. I think Irfan might be doing that if nobody gets to that.
I'm happy to do it too. I mean, I was kind of holding off because the kubefed federate command is kind of half-baked at present. It does generate types, but it doesn't actually generate validation. And so I was kind of waiting on that. But I mean, really, we can just release and, caveat import. It's not necessarily going to be fully functional until we decide to get to a beta or something. So if Irfan's already taken responsibility, I'm happy to have him do that. If for some reason he doesn't get to it,
yeah, it was on his agenda, but he took off last week most of the time. So probably he might be doing it this week.
Okay, I think that's fine.
Okay, and the other point was like, I think, is it time to cut 010?
What does that actually mean?
I think the 003, it looks more like a patch release. And we are in a way saying that like, okay, it is still experimental stuff. Yeah. So at least one.
It still is. I think to me, there's two major shifts in the API strategy that I'd like to do before we start saying, oh, this is more than incremental. The first is generic overrides, and the second is selector-based placements. Those are both in service of like currently kubefed enable is really just trying to generate the types to enable federation of specific resources. the next step will be taking a resource or even a namespace and saying, I want the federated equivalent, either as YAML or actually converted in the API. To me, that I'd like to get to that point before we get to an O1, just because A, we've kind of proved out the API and we have all the pieces in place, and we have enough ease of use that, you know, I don't really feel bad giving it to somebody to use. In its current form, it's really for advanced users only.
Okay, I think then it makes sense to prioritize those two items and get to that. I think in the community also somebody was asking for a roadmap. I think it's high time now we should prepare one and give some deadlines, I believe. I think we have enough contributors now, right?
I mean, I have a little bit of a mixed feeling about that because we don't actually have, you know, people who are committed to using it for like, I mean, we have more people coming on board now, but at least on the Red Hat side, we've really been focused on getting enough both information, like educating users, and getting something we can deliver into customers' hands. Because what we really want is feedback. In the absence of feedback, getting a roadmap together is like just, you know, crystal ball, you know, forecasting. We think this is what people will want. I'd like to see a little bit of grounding in what people want, and then I want to like actually drive a roadmap based on user asks rather than developer like want.
Yeah, I think it could be just
We're getting there. Don't get me wrong.
Right. It could be just
I'm
a wish
wanting
list.
a little more feedback before we start like laying out hard deadlines for the future. And once we have that feedback, I mean, the first step to me is just getting a timeline for beta.
I agree. I think deadlines come second, definitely. First thing is what we want to do, and and prioritizing, like, yeah, this is better than this. We should start to that. And then probably deadline may be a wrong word. Yeah, it's just a plan.
Yeah. I don't mean to say that planning or deadlines aren't important. I just want to make sure that we're not committing to things in advance of users contributing to that process.
Yeah. Okay, I think we are time. I think let's wind up the meeting. Is there anything else we wanted to discuss?
No, Shashi, this is John again. Just a quick thing. I think I would start investing some more time on this. I already thought of taking on to one of the issues that was about logging, additional logging on resource scheduling. So I'll continue to hope to see more work there from me. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, John. Yeah. Okay, then
feel free to reach out if you have any trouble or if you want more substantive things to work on. Not all the issues are going to be in GitHub, and also there's always a certain amount of education, mentoring involved in getting started with something new. So
that would be awesome. Sure. Thanks, Mark. I will take that into account. Reach out. Yeah. Appreciate your extending help.
Okay, then. See you guys. See you all. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks all.